trioxide, and I have three co-rapporteurs, starting with Bas Eickhout for the Greens.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. So this is indeed about chromium trioxide, which is known as human carcinogenic, where there is no safe level can be determined. So the REACH law is very clear. If that is the case, the only reason why authorization could be approved is because you can show that the socio-economic benefits outweigh the costs, and there is no alternative that exists. So you need to prove both elements in order to get authorization for a proved carcinogenic, which we are talking about. What we are seeing here is a bit of a repetition of what we objected as a parliament already last year with LANXES, the LANXES consortium. There we had a majority to object to it, and the main reason is that what you see here is that it's a kind of a blanket request for authorization. So you have chromium trioxide and then you apply that for many different means. So we have here the company REACH Law Limited, which is representing a Russian company who is creating chromium trioxide, wants to have that on the European market. They only have contact with distributors, and these distributors sell it to companies that are using it. That's basically what we're doing. But the REACH law is very clear. If you want to use it, you need to show for each application that there is no alternative. You need to do that proper assessment for each application. You cannot just say, okay, it's a carcinogenic, but we just apply it to all different means. No, you need to then show for each application, so that's how the law is constructed, that there are no alternatives and that the benefits outweigh the costs. That has not been done here. That has not been done. And that's even being acknowledged by the Commission, that the data are insufficient. ECHA is acknowledging that, and the Commission is acknowledging that. However, what the Commission is now saying, well, we grant the authorization anyhow, and in its review report, then the applicants need to come up with the insufficient data. That is against the law. The REACH law is very clear. When you want to grant authorization, you need to come up with that data beforehand. You cannot change that now by saying, I grant authorization and the missing data will come later on. This was already a case law. Last year, March 2019, the General Court already blamed and was very clear, saying to the Commission, you cannot correct an authorization by putting in conditions for later on, which they're doing again here. So they're not learning from our objection, they're not learning from the court case, they are doing the same now again and again. And I think this is just a matter of principle and rule of law. And also very important, we don't need to prove, the law is very clear, we don't need to prove that alternatives exist. The applicant needs to prove that no alternatives exist. That's how the law is constructed, and they have not done so until now. And the Commission is even acknowledging that. So we are talking about a fundamental and principal case here, and then the Commission will say later on, of course, to say, well, this will mean that all kind of companies need to close down because they have their applications in place right now. That's not what we're asking. We're not saying refuse the authorization. What we're saying is redo your homework. Make sure that there where you propose to grant the authorization, the lacking data is there. That you can show that the benefits are outweighing the costs, and you have to show that no alternatives exist. Probably you can't show that for this blanket authorization, but this is also why we are so critical on these kind of authorization requests where you have many different applications. You have to do it per application, and the applicant needs to prove, and that needs to be done, and that is what the Commission should require, and if that is provided, then we can also authorize it. And that will probably mean that some of the authorizations cannot be granted, and some will. But that's not up to us, that's to the applicants to show, and this blanket authorization is just against the principle of how REACH works, and that's why it's a matter of rule of law that we have to object to it, like we did last year, and hopefully like last year, we will have a majority again.
Thank you. For SND, Maria Arena.
Well, very briefly, I don't want to repeat what Baz has just said. We fully agree. quite aside from the fact that there's a problem with the application of the law, there's a problem of protection of the population. Chromium trioxide is a carcinogenic, mutagenic substance, so it does meet the criteria to be banned, firstly. Secondly, as we've already heard, the Commission decision is a violation of Article 60 of REACH on chemical security. The authorisation proposal doesn't meet Article 55 of REACH, which has to have studies of technical and economic feasibility studies. The Commission's decision is the supposition that there is no viable alternative for all of the uses that are covered by the authorisation. But as my colleague has just said, this is not an acceptable practice. Finally, there is a ruling from the court. There's a position from Parliament and a court ruling, and yet the Commission continues as it always has done. And the impression we have is that the Commission isn't really taking us seriously in its work.
For Renew, Martin Ochik.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm not gonna try to repeat what was said before, but there's few additional points. First of all, I'm seriously disappointed by this authorization, and that's why I co-signed the objection. Because what the Commission is doing in this is not only saying us that we would need, if we make a parallel with the climate change, we would need a replacement for coal-fired power plants with essentially one big source equally sized and nothing else would work. We would be in a deadlock with the climate change, but that's what we see here with the chromium. But not only that, I believe that this approach is stifling innovation in Europe. We have alternatives for some of the uses, not all of the uses, but some of the uses we have. And why we are undermining the innovation in Europe by basically giving a bianco check for a very broad authorization, when what the REACH requires is that we look use by use and exactly for the purpose to support innovation, to support small and medium enterprises, to support researchers to come up with specific uses, with specific alternatives for hazardous chemicals, which might not be even another chemical, might be another way, laser, how to do the function. And there we can gradually reduce the risk to the health of workers, risk to the health of consumers, risk to the environment. But the Commission is failing us, and I think it's really time that we look at it with a fresh eyes and we properly support not only human health and environment, which are very important, but innovation in Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. So I don't have any speaker for the EPP. So if ever there is one, please raise your button, speak button. No speaker for ID neither. So we move to ECR and Mr. Fiocchi.
Can you please push your speak button, Mr. Fiocchi?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes,
Hello?
we hear you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. But on the chromium trioxide, I was going to say that there are extremely valid scientific reasoning to maintain it in terms of safety of the aerospace equipment and a huge industry in Europe. Also, that a lot of the small and micro companies are relying on this technology, so they will be bankrupt, so they will be taken into account if we ban this chemical. And last, there are no alternative. But I want to stress the position of my friend Bas, which you say that this, what we are saying, is outside the rule of law. We need to be careful because a lot of time ECHA is ignoring the position of the applicants, saying that there is no alternative. So we need to clarify this, because otherwise we're going to get into a juridical fight, which is not conducting to any position for anybody. And this is very important. Last, of course, ECR is against this objection But thank you very much.
Thank you. For the EPP, we have Peter Liese.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry for the confusion. Normally, colleague Christian Doleschall is responsible. I thought he's in the line, but Christian and me, we agree. EPP is against the objection. And you know the arguments from the last file. This substance is not having any negative effect in the final product. So there's no risk for the health and no risk for the environment. The problem is in the manufacturing process, and we just don't believe that it's good to give this technology to the outside of Europe. We don't think that employers outside Europe are better protected with good regulation to protect our workers in Europe. So we think that the effect of this objection would be that we have more risk because there is no really suitable alternative, and the product will be produced outside Europe. We import the final product, we put the risk to the workers outside Europe and lose the jobs. That's why EPP will vote against this objection. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have no GUE speaker, so we move to the Commission. Michael Thu.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, honourable members. Richelaw submitted the application as only representative for the Russian company which was referred to. This application is a subsequent application to the already submitted application by the consortium called CETAC, which was led by the company Lanxess. The Russian company NPCC is one of several non-EU suppliers for part of the same supply chain like the one covered by CETAC. It is correct that Richelaw's application is identical to the CETAC applications. The opinions of the ECHA committees are substantially the same. In response to the Parliament resolution of 27th March 2019 and to the court judgment which was mentioned here earlier, the Commission has taken out functional chrome plating with decorative character from the draft authorization decisions for both applications and requested instead substitution plans for these uses. The Commission aims to take separate decisions once these substitution plans are available and have been assessed. Furthermore, the scope of the remaining uses which were applied by both companies, CETAC and Richelaw, were further reduced to a number of key functionalities. I think it is therefore not correct to say that we are granting a blanco check without having looked properly into the applications. The current draft authorization decisions only covers the uses for which the Commission concluded that no suitable alternatives are available and for which certain functionalities such as wear and corrosion resistance are necessary. For legal and consistency reasons, the decisions on both applications have to be identical in their corresponding parts. We had planned a vote on the revised CETAC authorization at an earlier REACH committee in May, but following the information received about this pending motion for resolution, we have suspended to proceed on the CETAC authorization. I would like to recall that if the two authorizations are not granted, the affected companies in the EU, and this needs to be underlined, in the EU, would have to immediately stop their chrome plating activities, which would have significant socioeconomic impacts in many sectors, including strategic sectors. Beyond the severe socioeconomic impacts, further delays in granting the authorization will result in delays in the imposition of additional risk management measures suggested in the measures foreseen. The solution proposed by the Parliament to refuse the authorization and at the same time to grant downstream users additional time to submit their own application is, in our understanding, not legally viable according to REACH. It is also important to recall that during chrome plating, the substance at stake, chromium trioxide, is completely transformed and is not present in the final articles. Therefore, the final articles do not pose risk to the consumers. Anybody producing such articles outside the EU, according to standards not comparable to the suggested measures, can export them to the EU. In summary, the Commission is convinced that we have acted fully within the implementing powers conferred to us in the REACH regulation and that we have taken into account the judgment of the General Court. Thank you.
So we will vote today on a procedure we will get back on after the discussion on the second objection. Person to